we need to beat down those doors and make sure that there's no extraneous reason that somebody can't get into the room that they deserve to be in via merit. Equity? Are you kidding me? Equity is just this horrible thing. I mean, it's a Trojan horse because it sounds like equality. It sounds like fairness. It sounds like
be against it.
Right. And the key point is equity needs to die.
Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Into the Impossible podcast. It's approximately our 300th episode. And who better to share that with than our friend, our most frequent guest, raconteur, mathematician, dad, Eric Weinstein. How are you, my friend?
Great to be with you, Brian.
We were together last in person, well, earlier today with Professor Daniel Green, and you can find that episode here or there or somewhere, in an episode called What's Going On with Physics, What's Wrong with Physics. We're not going to talk about physics. Now we're going to talk about the really important stuff, the clickbait, the reason everybody came here. And that's really to debrief from our last encounter in person, which was in a very disgusting place to spend some time in the middle of fall, and that was Florence, Italy. I mean, that was horrible. I don't know how we both survived Florence, Italy, but
Got through.
And it was arranged in honor of the magnanimous and mellifluous David Berlinski. You've known for quite some time. I've not known him for as long, but I've come to enjoy him and like him and regard his intellect with great respect and somewhat trepidation. But there we encountered many, many new people, at least from my perspective, and I use that to mine for guests on the Into the Impossible podcast. And 3 of those guests have appeared so far, and that is Dr. Jay Bhattacharya of Stanford University. We spoke about disease, which is in its 3rd year as we're speaking, almost exactly 3 years to the day. It's Valentine's Day, by the way. Happy Valentine's Day.
Happy Valentine's Day.
Yeah, it's great to see. I got you a gift. Stuart, zoom in on this. We have our producer here. This is for you, Eric, my sweet friend. It's called Foam, Sweet Foam, and it is soap from Uranus and for Uranus.
Uranus.
Okay, Neil deGrasse Tyson. He was not there. We had these esteemed professors, including Dr. J, not the basketball player, but Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, who's become a great friend and really an intellectual hero and an incredible intellect who stood up against with courage against the forces arrayed against him, as he described at that meeting. I also had on 2 interesting Christian space scientists, scientists, who have been on. And
scientists who happen to be believing Christians.
Who are believing Christians. One of whom, Dr. James Tour, started off life as a Jew, and he is what's known as a Messianic Jew, or a Jew for Jesus. And he, I would say, was one of my most controversial episodes to date.
How so?
Well, I received quite a significant amount of vitriol from about his appearance and how could I platform him? How could I have a zealot and a science denier, even though this person has published over 700 articles and he is a named chair professor at a top research university, Rice
University.
And most of the
that's a crazy perspective.
That's really heterodox. And a lot of the comment came from, in particular, a very well-known YouTuber who's going to be on the podcast. His name is Professor Dave Farina. He calls himself a professor. He's not an official professor the way that Jim Tour is, or Luke Barnes, who was the other guest that I had on, or Jay. Nevertheless, he makes incredible content for his channel, but he's taken quite a strong approach to dealing with the Christian space scientists that we were encountering there, including past guest Stephen C. Meyer and people of that same stature, Discovery Institute folks that were there. And it wasn't only about that.
I'm getting the idea that I don't have enough controversy in my life.
We need to have more. First thing I want to ask you is regarding these gentlemen. When we were there, you were the token atheist there. I would say you described yourself as an atheist. I describe myself as a practicing agnostic, which we can get into the distinction there. But these gentlemen,
two Jews who pray, who aren't convinced that it's 2 anyone up there,
and not even convinced there's 2 of us.
Right. I forgot about your solipsism.
But we talked about, while you were there, you brought up, as a voice of reason, I would say, you brought up this notion that I've described in the following kind of logical progression. I was asked to write, an encomium for Stephen C. Meyer's 1,000-page long book. He gave me a 10-day deadline to do that. Thank you, Stephen. So I wasn't able to get it on the back cover, right? So, and this kind of logic that he and I discuss is often phrased by me in the following way. If there is a cause to the universe, if the universe came into being, there is a first cause. And that first cause then translates into a purpose, a meaning, a reason perhaps for which the universe was created. Perhaps there was a subjugation of such an entity's free will. And there's no information in the universe that doesn't trace itself back to some source. And therefore, Jesus. And the line of progression is a short one. And
I don't associate that with Stephen C. Meyer.
He associated with. I mean, he agreed with me that
I don't
that
think
happens.
he's a therefore Jesus guy.
Well, there's a personal God, right? So there's two properties a God must have, right? God must have created the universe.
We're going to have a disagreement. This is awesome.
All right, this is good. This makes for good television. The notion that you can have a universe without a cause is sort of goes back to St. Thomas Aquinas and many other thinkers, unmoved movers and so forth. But eventually that cause has to have a reason, and that reason is ultimately the genesis of man. And in their theology, Jesus is the reason for not only the season, but for the creation itself. Yeah. In other words, there has to be a personal God, and we Jews practicing. You observe Judaism. You're not practicing at the level I am, maybe, or our mutual friend Ben Shapiro might be, but you still have Shabbat. In the Shabbat prayers on a Friday evening, we say two things. We attest to the fact by standing up, holding a glass of wine, that God created the universe, and not only that, that's a universal, literally universal God, but also personally, he led us out of Egypt. Those are the two functions.
You're talking about the Kiddush, where the first part before the wine is taken from Genesis or Breshit, and then the wine is drunk, and it's the separation between the first birth and the second birth of the Jewish people from the escape from Mitzrayim or Egypt, the narrow place.
That's right. And
places.
So if you were designing a religion, would you include physical laws or physical forces, and would there be,
no,
is it necessary and sufficient to have a creation of the universe as part of your religion and a creation of a personal relationship with God?
No.
If you were God, how would you have orchestrated? How would you write the Torah according to Eric Weinstein?
Well, I'm not quite sure. We have to figure out what it is that we're asking and discussing. I think that these are very interesting things, because I think that the first issue is effectively, should religious scientists live under a cloud of suspicion? And if their religion informs their science, what are we to make of that? Is it contaminated? And I think it's very important to recognize that there are multiple ways of being a scientist who happens to be religious. And I've learned this over time. So I've been wrong on this topic, and in coming into contact with higher quality scientists motivated by religion, I've come to understand that there's a subpopulation that is very special and interesting. And it's effectively a population of people who agree to the rules of science. They're not going to cheat on the rules of science because Jesus. But they are going to use the idea of purpose and a personal relationship with God to give them courage to question things that are essentially unquestionable within the union of scientists, that will get you thrown out of the union of scientists very quickly, as to your point. So what we're talking about is relatively self-destructive scientists focused on science who get their courage from religion and some of their bearings and their focus. So for example, many of these people do not believe that there's a persuasive case for random mutation as being the major engine of selection. They believe that it is simply improbable, and they point to very often the Wistar conference held at the University of Pennsylvania, the Wistar Institute, and they try to say this is a live issue where the books got closed prematurely, and in fact it's the atheists, according to them, who were led into error because they were trying to close the books desperately so as not to leave any gap large enough for a God to be smuggled into the canon of science. I am persuaded that the Richard Dawkins of the world, who have contributed, in my estimation, hugely to modern evolutionary theory, are so afraid of dealing with religious colleagues that they were eager to shut the books and not give many of these people their due. And what's more, the concept of intelligent design is a really interesting one. Now, my brother, who I think has just brilliant turns of phrase and insights into evolutionary theory, one of his, Richard Dawkins, I think, wants to be remembered for the meme, not as the GIF that gets sent over Twitter, but the meme and the extended phenotype as his greatest contributions. And I think one of Brett's better ideas is understanding perception-mediated selection. It is very clear that when you have various breeds of dog, they are intelligently designed. When you produce a mule from a donkey and a horse that is not a natural animal, you are producing an intelligently designed animal. When you create orchid varieties. So in all of these cases, you have to admit that Darwinian theory has perception-mediated selection, the display of bowerbirds, where they build these structures and adorn them with blue in some cases. Perception-mediated selection is a form of endogenous design which is intelligent because it is mediated through perception.
Right.
It's a good place to study it because the words intelligent design have been made radioactive. Right? And so what we're arguing about is should the books have been closed with the neo-Darwinian synthesis, or should they have been left open? And I have to say, I really think that without the religious scientists who are willing to destroy themselves and their careers, but who still do not wish their love of a benevolent God or a fearsome Old Testament God or a personal Jesus Christ, I believe that many of those people are responsible for prying the books open when Dawkins and company wished to close them prematurely. And I'm honestly sympathetic with the Dawkins perspective. I cannot stand what I've called Jesus smuggling, where you're in some very careful argument and you've set everything up, and then somebody sort of says, well, I just believe that God's love pervades everything. You're just like, oh, brother, do I really have to listen to this? On the other hand, going toe-to-toe with some of these religious scientists is an eye-opening experience because they are highly motivated they know that they're heretics. And if you think about, let's say, Galileo's heresy, they are in some sense the heretics of today, and their reputations are burned at the stake. They're not Bruno in
1600
in the square. But I think that what we have to say is that many of these people are making points that atheists wish would go away.
What is the strongest, or give me a couple of arguments from design that appeal intellectually?
Well, I'm particularly motivated by two systems in perception-mediated selection, one of which has to do with the Lampsilis mussel, which produces a meaty lip that extends outside of its shell in clearly the form of a bait fish for bass in clear streams. And when a bass swims by, the mussel wiggles this little piece of meat that is outside, and it looks exactly like a fish in the stream. And the bass sometimes fall for it and sometimes see the ruse. But if they fall for it, the bass clamps down on the lip, and all of the young of the mussel, of the Lampsilis mussel, diffuse into the gills of the bass, clamp on to get a blood meal, and are taken away by the bass to distribute them in the stream where the mussel doesn't have the ability to spread its young. There's no way you can tell me that that isn't an intelligently designed system, and it's the bass that is the intelligence. And the bass is specifically designing its own fooling, its self-deception, because dumber bass fell for this trick before, and smarter bass didn't fall for it, and that pushes the selective pressures in order to produce this. Now, there's a closely related system that is not based on predation, which is the Bass system, but is based on sexual reproduction, and that has to do with the Ophrys system in orchids. So there's this one sort of clade of orchids where, I talk about this a lot. Darwin, I asked the question one day, what did Darwin do after Origin of Species? Like, how do you follow yourself for an encore? And he wrote this book, which I couldn't believe the title, which was on the various contrivances by which British and foreign orchids are fertilized by insects. And I thought, that is the dumbest thing I can possibly imagine. But Darwin, being Darwin, was incredibly smart. Orchids are incredibly speciated. And therefore, they're a great system in which to study various mechanisms. Now, if you read that, Darwin does not understand why the Ophrys orchid makes a replica of the species that pollinate it, particularly the females, with using its lowest of 5 petals, I believe, and producing incredible pheromones that are almost indistinguishable from the pheromones produced by a female who is receptive to mating. And you watch Darwin trying to figure out why this would be, and he can't figure out that this is actually a consequence of his own theory, because the theory is too new. And it's just like one of the most beautiful vignettes, and nobody talks about it. And so what I would say is, in that situation, a male tries to copulate with the flower, not realizing that it's not a female. And if it's fooled twice, then the flowers don't have to give up an energetically expensive nectar meal. And they can be very cheap about it. All they have to do is to offer an ersatz sexual experience. And this is called pseudocopulation. So in both of these systems, if you look at the mirror orchid, for example, it's a stunning replica with hair and the shininess on the back, and this the whole thing. You can tell what is fooling the pollinator. Now, both of these are systems in which that which is dumber is fooling that which is smarter, using the intelligence, the bounded intelligence of the thing being fooled, to intelligently design a trap. And both of these are effectively parasites because they're stealing energy from the dupe, and that energy is used to further the species in an antagonistic fashion. If I make that point and I say, actually, intelligent design is all through the animal kingdom, it's just not what you think. It's not a question of an initial creator who's deciding, the unmoved mood, or saying, you're an aardvark, you're a eucalyptus tree. So endogenous intelligent design is essential to Darwinian theory within Brett's context of perception-mediated selection. And then what do you get from the atheistic science community? Is like, we will have no such discussion, because what they want is a very clean, bright line. Show me the card-carrying members of the church, and we will dispatch them. And my feeling is, that's not how the game's played.
I love that you worked in sexual selection on Valentine's Day. It is.
Don't try this at home, kids.
So, I guess, pivoting to where the information comes into play has been my challenge. It's not altogether more impressive to me if you invoke a deity, at the last second, or if you have to invoke it at the beginning of time, whatever that means. But I think that there is, kind of an almost difficult to engage in a rapprochement between these two different fields. And I wonder why it is. And from my perspective as somebody who's agnostic, and I do make a distinction. I asked this, the first podcast guest on the Into the Impossible podcast was not Eric, it was Freeman Dyson. And Freeman
I'm honored to have been bumped.
That's not what he said at the time. No, the claim that Freeman would make is that he was agnostic. And I said, Freeman, that's very interesting. Just out of curiosity, what church do you go to? Oh, I don't go to church. Okay. How would a very intelligent alien looking down at the earth and seeing you and your, fellow countryman Richard Dawkins, how would this intelligent alien distinguish between the two of you if your practices are identical? In other words, you don't go to the same church that Richard Dawkins doesn't go to. So by what means do you distinguish yourself as agnostic from just atheist, and just a lazy atheist, or just maybe I don't mean dishonest, I'm not going to besmirch him, I loved him, but the point being that you're not being fully honest with you. You're really an atheist, but you don't want to say it. For whatever reason, you don't want to say it. So why not come out with it? And I think the thing that distinguishes the believers that we met there, that I met there, Bhattacharya, Luke Barnes, and to a very...
Are they all out?
Are they all these episodes are out, yes.
No.
Out of the closet?
Yeah.
You mean as believers?
I'm telling you,
yes,
there's
absolutely.
a huge stigma against being a believer in
something. No. James Tour not only has...
No, James Tour I believe, but I don't know. I didn't know Jay's status.
Oh yes. No, Jay is we talked about it extensively in our interview, and actually we'll pivot to that towards the end when we talk about the current status of COVID and the prospects for what we call teshuva, repentance. Is it possible for the proponents of lockdowns and masking and all sorts?
We should also just say that given that Jay's last name is evidently Bengali, he is a Christian believing.
Yes.
Academician.
Very, very devout. Right. And we spoke about the role the church played, not only in his life, for a very long time, in his guiding principle in morality, and also in the role that he played with the COVID-19 proclamation. Yeah, standing up at his church and engaging his church and fellow church members to engage them to provide some of the first samples for the study that led to eventually the Great Barrington Declaration. Anyway, we're not talking about him. I really want to talk about people like James Tour. So I feel like as a believer or as an agnostic, you can doubt your belief at any time. Theodicy. It's a classic question. Why do good things happen to bad? By the way, which is more annoying to you? When something good happens to a bad person or when something bad happens to a good person?
It's not even a context. If some good thing happens to a bad person, I always hope that it might give them pause and that gives them an opportunity to course correct.
Okay, fine. So theodicy is a classic thing that believers have to struggle with, and some will say, well, that's our only thing that I'm not going to comment either way. But I asked James Tour. Let me just stick to James Tour, and it's on camera. I said, look, James, I have doubts. Do you ever doubt your theism? Do you ever have this notion? And I found it very striking because he said absolutely not. He said he never doubts for 1 nanosecond.
I don't believe that.
I found it hard to believe it, but I also found it in concert with his conversion to Christianity. In Judaism, as you know, our catechism is the Shema, which means you are commanded to love God. And what does it mean? Do you have to be commanded to love your children? I don't feel like you have to be. It's natural to love your kids, right? You only command something that's unnatural, right? Don't eat pork. Pork's pretty delicious. I used to eat it in my youth. It's pretty good, so don't eat it.
It's the prosciutto with melon that really gets you, right?
Oh, that was tough in Italy. I had to skip over the lobster, the langosta. But you don't command something that's easy to do. In other words, God is not lovable in Judaism. God is not considered lovable. He's actually considered fearful and awesome in a quasi mixed hybrid
we didn't read
state.
The sequel.
That's the New Testament. No, I did read the sequel. So now tell me, do you ever doubt your atheism? And what
all
do you
the time?
Right. Okay. So
no, it would be
what
crazy
makes you
not
doubt
to.
your Yeah. So what makes you doubt it?
Oh, just imagine just believing all the time with 100% confidence that the world has no purpose. It's a giant
pointless.
Yeah, pointless exercise, sound and fury signifying nothing. It's really bleak. And I don't think we're meant to be atheists. I think we're meant to be religious. And I think that there's a Chomskyan pre-grammar of religion. Mm-hmm. And so if you don't honor that, you're going to end up oscillating your whole life because you're going to believe in nothing. And then you're going to find out that life can't be supported so easily by believing in nothing. And then you're going to overdo it. And so rather than being a spring, a weight on a spring engaging in simple harmonic oscillation between atheism and belief, I thought I'd skip the round trip and try both camping and decamping so that there's less oscillation. Mm. And I think prayer is incredibly important. And if you try to chisel on prayer by saying, I know this is not true, but I'm going to do it anyway, I don't think it's very effective.
Yeah.
So, I go to movies that I don't believe actually happened. I don't think Star Wars is a documentary, although The Matrix is. And I think that in the same way, you have to be immersed in part in religion so that it doesn't come and bite you. And by the way, Jim is a very special case, and I hope that I'm not saying anything out of turn. Jim's introduction to Christianity was that they just seemed happier. He found a group of Christians who immediately put him in a good mood, made him feel wanted, loved, cared about. It was an experience that he hadn't had. And that's a very different issue than nanomachines providing a puzzle to him that he can't solve. And so if you ask the question of why does he not doubt himself, I believe that what he came into Christianity for is different than what gives him confidence, because I believe that he has a scientist's confidence. Whether he's accurate or not is a different question.
Well, I think I might disagree, because in the conversation that we had on the podcast, he was expressing it as a result of direct revelation, that he had encountered Jesus Christ, whether through prayer, meditation.
We had different conversations, and I'll leave it to Jim to sort that out. But I do know that one of his points is...
it is true. You want to have a bad, like join a religion where everyone's unhappy and miserable, or stay in the religion and from birth, as he was.
Judaism's a tough religion. It's a lot harder than some others.
Yeah.
And I believe, in a certain sense, Christianity softens the strictures and difficulties of Judaism, some of the abstractions. You make certain things very concrete.
Yeah.
But I think, I want to get back to the science. I think Jim's basic point is that nanomachines that we find in nature,
the cell,
or like ATP synthase, for example, inside of mitochondria. It's one of, I think, only 2 wheels that we know about in nature, the other being flagella.
Or rotors,
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I think his point of view is you have no idea how difficult these machines are to make. That if you took the best chemists, you gave them the largest budgets, and you let them run for tens of thousands of years, there's nothing we're doing now souped up that would get you to these machines.
Yeah, and that's where he gets a lot of pushback from others in the God of the Gaps perspective.
No, I'm just saying that I believe that some of his confidence isn't from the fact that that is true or isn't true, but he has looked at the situation and he has come to that determination. And his feeling about this is, if you want to talk about minimal explanations, his belief is it's easier to deal with a conscious designer. Mm-hmm. Now, I don't share that, but I understand his perspective.
So pivoting to something that's still in the news.
But wait a second. I want to get back to Jay Bhattacharya.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Mm-hmm.
We all benefited from Jay's devotion to Christianity because it gave him the stupid courage to do the right thing, even though we now understand that Fauci and Collins were having this little back channel about swift and devastating takedowns of the reasoning of fringe epidemiologists. And, my feeling is that we just need to get rid of the Collins and Faucis because we can't afford them inside of the temple of science. If you're going to be reasonable and reasoned, and you're going to be in charge of this, you cannot engage in anti-collegial behavior like that.
It's more than just anti-collegial. I mean, it's almost borderline, of
it's
suppression.
Pathological.
Right. So that actually, I did want to continue talking about God and therefore Tony Fauci.
Sorry.
I joked. I said Tony Fauci is God. You missed that.
Completely.
So when I was thinking about this episode and what we could call it, I want to call it what happens below the von Karman line stays below the von Karman line. So the von Karman line is 100 kilometers or so. It's a fictitious surface over which we consider space to begin, the atmosphere to sort of end. And there are 4 events that are taking place right now in the sub-von Karman zone region of our atmosphere. One of those is global warming. Another one is COVID-19, which is respiratorily passed, as we know. And the other one is nuclear annihilation. Yeah. And actually, there's a 4th one, which has come to light very recently, which are UFOs and unidentified flying objects operating in the troposphere and possibly being shot down all the time lately, as of this recording on February 14th. So there's 4 phenomena. These are really highlighting, and actually another thing that happened on Valentine's Day in 1990 was the famous pale blue dot image taken by the Voyager 1 spacecraft at the command of finger puppet extraordinaire somewhere over there is Carl Sagan. So he commanded it, turn around, take a picture, and he called it famously a mote of dust suspended on a sunbeam. And how many people he waxed and poetically have fought over their fraction of that one pixel in that famous image suspended on a sunbeam. I'm going to ask you, of these different phenomena, UFOs, COVID, global warming, and nuclear annihilation, which one is keeping you up at night the most?
All of them.
The most?
No. I mean, look.
They're equal.
Well, as you know, some N years ago, I started speaking about the twin nuclei problem, which is that when we, in 1953, entered the nucleus of the eukaryotic cell and extracted the three-dimensional structure of DNA, we became godlike within that nucleus. And then less than 6 months earlier, in 1952, with the explosion, the test of Ivy Mike, we came to know, physicists brought sin and came to know the power of the sun in the form of thermonuclear reactions mediated by the Teller-Ulam design. And my feeling is, it's interesting when you tell people you need to worry about the twin nuclei problem, and then COVID happens coming, next door to a lab with a very active charity called the Eco Health Alliance, led by Peter Daszak, defended by, was it 66 or 69 Nobel laureates in the Lancet? I mean, just complete corruption of scientific norms. So let's assume for the moment that this is some sort of biological weapons convention workaround that may have spilled over through a wet market or something like that. And then we're in Ukraine and we're not allowed to question why we are going to higher and higher levels of escalation. Now, I don't know about you, but almost all of my ancestors came from Ukraine. And if you ask Jews, Ashkenazi Jews, about where they came from in that region, they usually say something like the following: well, it's a little region that sometimes was Poland, and sometimes it was Lithuania, and sometimes it was Ukraine, and sometimes it was Russia, and sometimes it was Belarus. We cannot afford to have these borders oscillate as they have always oscillated. In fact, they didn't oscillate. If you look at a time lapse, much after World War II, up until the fall of the Berlin Wall, because of the specter of nuclear annihilation. And I will point out that Teller famously came from the Lutheran Gymnasium in Budapest with Laszlo Ratz as his high school math teacher,
and Szilard,
and with Szilard and von Neumann, and like the world's greatest secondary
high school,
the world's greatest high school
JV team.
Give it up for the Lutheran Gymnasium. And then Stan Ulam came from a town which I'm now forced to call Lviv, which I think I always grew up saying something closer to Lvov, and that is a Polish town in northeastern Ukraine, where Ukrainians are fighting like 8 seconds by hypersonic missile to the border in Poland. So I'm not supposed to say I called it, but we're insane. I mean, just the twin nuclei problem within the space of the time that I was talking about it, we're facing potential absolute cataclysms. And we're now funding more Eco Health Alliance. We're trying to figure out if we should be sending planes after sending tanks into Ukraine. We're not supposed to discuss it. Nobody knows what's going on. I don't know what we're doing, but I do know that we're playing Russian roulette, and we're not going to be surviving this if we keep playing this every time somebody wants to change a border in Central and Eastern Europe.
And just, lingering on that one moment longer, thinking about in our community, in the Jewish community, every single Jewish community, San Diego, Los Angeles, Washington, D.C., there is some tribute to the Holocaust, or, there's some memorial to the Holocaust. Bigger ones, smaller ones, Washington, D.C. and L.A. are two notable ones. And then, of course, in Israel at Yad Vashem. I was thinking of, kind of getting your take on it. We have one Hiroshima, and there's one Nagasaki, and those are the two places. There's places. I mean, here in San Diego, we actually have a Peace Garden and in Japanese, but there's nothing as visceral as if you've been to any of these Holocaust memorials. I've only been to Yad Vashem. Actually, I should come to see.
Yad Vashem is powerful, but it's not. I wouldn't put it in my top 5.
Yeah, so that's a lacuna in my Jewish journey. But at any rate, why don't we kind of stigmatize, and not about the morality? I think it was ultimately moral, and it was a good decision by Truman, but ultimately, if we had more awareness, you've called for, with deadly seriousness, the resumption of tests.
Nobody listened.
The resumptions of above ground, rare and controlled and moderate, but to bring to a visceral sense the notion of what we're playing with literal atomic fire. What about stepping back from that with the inherent difficulties of a teller device and the resultant radioactivity that might accompany it, would accompany it? But what about this notion of, well, we are not doing enough in the never forget realm when it comes to nuclear annihilation or just devastation? I don't think the world will go on just fine. I mean, there'll be a planet here, but life and
sorry, when you say that, there will be a sphere here. There will be life form. There will be life
cockroaches
forms
and tardigrades.
See, I know where you're going because we always have the same
hashtag
conversation.
Tardigrades. But tell me, what could we do to? And then, obviously, my follow-up question is going to be: was there an analog for COVID?
I've changed my mind about this. I called it about as cleanly as somebody can call it, and then it happened, and then we denied that it was coming out of the Wuhan Institute of Virology. And we're also denying that we are trying to corner a conventional enemy who also possesses unconventional weapons, which, pardon my French, but this is just the dumbest thing I can imagine. All the same people who said that Putin would never invade Ukraine are right here telling us exactly why this is safe, which it isn't. This is the end. We're on borrowed time, and we're not going to avoid this. We don't have the right leaders. This just doesn't make any sense. And the reason it doesn't make any sense is because people need to be so proximate to the problem that it plays on their mind and they can't think about anything else. And the two monuments that I would recommend above all others to those lost in the Holocaust are maybe three. Okay, so the Berlin Memorial, I can't even explain it. It's basically these stones, these pillars, and they start off very shallow. You could have a picnic on one, and you wander into this thing, and the height just gets higher and higher and higher, and it's mind-numbing, and you lose all perspective as to where you are, and you start to realize what happens when life is devalued and degraded, and all you see is the cold, austere stones. It is... Who thought it reminds me of Bohemian Rhapsody. It made sense to Freddie Mercury to write this thing, but if you describe it, let's write a really long song that mimics several operas that makes no sense. I would never have greenlit this project because I'm an idiot, right? Mm-hmm. The next one is Babyn Yar. Go to Kiev and try to keep yourself from feeling the sickness of standing near this ditch where people were just machine gunned and executed. It's a visceral thing that will cause you to lose your shit. And I guess the last one that really matters to me, which isn't even about Jews, is there's an amazing sculpture of a boxing ring on an angle. And it's to the Sinti, which is sort of a Roma community, boxing legend named Johann Trollman, who was very popular in German circles as a great boxing legend. He sort of was using the Muhammad Ali technique of being highly athletic rather than just large and powerful. And he was very good looking, swarthy complexion, and he fought in Germany, and the Nazis took his, there was a decision against him, and the crowd was having none of it because they knew boxing. So the Germans, the Nazis, were faced with the idea that this was not going down. And so they said, okay, we're going to change the rules to neutralize this guy's style. So he divorces his wife to save her life. I mean, it's hard not to get emotional about this. He covers himself, his dark skin, with flour to mock the Aryan preoccupation with purity. And he loses. And this guy gets sent to a camp, and they're using him to train other people and put on exhibitions, and finally they can't take it anymore, and I think that they just, I forget whether he got a hoe in the back of his head or a single bullet, But it took us until recently to reinstate his boxing championship that was taken away from him. I'd go to those 3 memorials. See how you do.
Well, that was unexpected, but very but extremely meaningful. I think.
But my point is, it won't last.
It'll wear off. The treadmill of
if you've ever had a near-death experience for like 2 weeks,
you're
every cup of water is a. When Warren Zevon was dying, I think David Letterman asked him, is there any message in this? You know that you're about to die. You've had this incredible canon of songs that you've written and performed. Is there any lesson? And Warren Zevon said, enjoy every sandwich. And, sandwich is a funny word. And it's a deadly serious point, which is you don't appreciate just the sheer joy of being alive because you can't. There's no way to keep these lessons in mind. We're not going to explode it above. I mean, it's the smart thing to do,
right.
But everyone's going to say, well, you're going to contaminate the atmosphere. It's like, you know what you're going to do? You're going to say Slava Ukraine, and you're going to post it, and then you're going to get onto the next thing, and you're not going to think about it, and and then one day, maybe have nothing to do with this incident, but eventually a much more deadly virus is going to come through the atmosphere, and eventually there's going to be a nuclear exchange which you can't handle, and you're going to say, why didn't we listen to the it reminds me of in New Orleans when Katrina hit and the levee broke, and I remember somebody on TV saying, who could possibly imagine that the levee would break? And I thought, didn't Led Zeppelin sing a song called When the Levee Breaks?
It's what they do, yeah.
I mean, it's just, I don't understand it. But I've come to accept that most humans cannot live with abstract knowledge. If something hasn't happened in 20 years, it's not going to happen. If it's never happened, then you never need to worry about anything that's a low probability, doesn't need to be thought about in the context of expected value.
I think you're exactly right. And I think...
You're seeing this in Turkey, by the way. We've had a huge, devastating earthquake. And Erdogan was celebrating the fact that by relaxing building standards, he got much more housing.
Right, and we're aping...
Kola kavod.
Right. And I think that's actually pertinent to, we're not going to talk much about UFOs and physics, but just UFOs and phenomena. I kind of feel like that's what's going on right now. I think we have these balloons, we have these unmanned air, and I called it, bread and saucers. And it's something that you can kind of like appreciate. Like this song by Miley Cyrus is going around now. It's called Flowers. And she's got an amazing voice and she has incredible characteristics. But it's a song that I could sing.
Oh, by the way, I've become a huge Ariana Grande fan. That gal,
she's got pipes. She has pipes.
Oh my God, is she a great singer?
So
I did not get that the first time.
Yeah. So, and with Miley, trust me, she's got incredible range and she's musical. She understands. Now, Eric, you know me. You were playing piano earlier today. My only instrument is Spotify, right? That's about all I can play, and I don't play it well. I can sing the song "Flowers" by Miley Cyrus. It's got a 1 hertz kind of bandwidth. It's very small kind of range, or
So how does it go?
It goes, I can buy myself flowers, I can hold my own hand. It's written like about her ex-husband. Now they just got divorced, and it's all in People magazine, which I know you subscribe to with physical review letters.
People, but the newsstands near you.
I was actually in People magazine last year.
Most eligible?
Quoted as handsomest, sexiest man. No. In this office. No, for a solar phenomenon, solar physics phenomenon.
Miley.
Now Miley, when she sings that song, it's like I said, it's 1 millihertz fraction of her octave range, right? But I can sing it, so it's something I can appreciate. I can replicate it. I can do a TikTok of it, and so forth. So
I'd like to see that
it's easy. Dr. Brian Keating on all platforms. But these saucers, it's something people can explain. Are these balloons? People can understand a balloon. Maybe they're all this. Maybe everything that's happened so far has been this, and maybe now we can dismiss it, or maybe we could say it's a military thing, and so. In other words, it's sort of the same thing in that it's approachable, it's relatable, it's you don't require advanced quantum physics to understand it. First of all, what do you make of these things? And is it potentially, at its core, a giant psyop designed to distract us like the bread and circus?
We don't know.
Except bread and saucers.
Look, the thing is, there are 2 basic doors into this phenomenon. One is indirect evidence, and the other is direct evidence. If you ask me, if you go by direct evidence, with everybody owning a camera in their pocket, you have to say that this is nonsense. Because there is no direct evidence that's high quality. There's no high quality data in the public domain.
That's right.
So let's just say that from the direct evidence perspective, this is nonsense. It doesn't exist. It's very silly. Okay, now you switch your lens. You say, there seems to be an overwhelming amount of indirect evidence, like psychotically overwhelming. And I was unprepared for this until I started looking at it. Mm-hmm. I have no idea how we would, I mean, you can get rid of people who see ghosts and people who have a need for attention, and you're left with people who don't want to talk about it, whose lives have been destroyed. Mm-hmm. And, you know, particularly some very kind of modest cognitive gift folks who seem to be able to act at the level of Brando, which I don't believe. I believe that these people have been hurt. Some of them with...
By who?
With necrosis. We don't know. Mm-hmm. But according to Gary Nolan, he's seen damage paths through tissue that correspond to crazy stories where the story actually has a physical trace. I would say from the indirect perspective, I don't think that we're capable of faking this at this level. Even if we wanted to. Even if we wanted to fly, you know, SR-71 Blackbirds and their successors, and we wanted a story, so in case anybody sees one, you know, the jig isn't up. Mm-hmm. So I've never seen a subject that has that profile. Zero direct evidence, overwhelming indirect evidence. Somebody smarter than me has to call it.
And in terms of probability in a Bayesian sense between getting hearings on the EcoHealth Alliance versus getting public access.
We're not getting anything. No.
Why do we have a government like that? I mean, I think a lot of this flows down from government. Not all, but a lot of it does.
Sources and methods has become the bane of our democratic existence. I am convinced that there is an issue of privilege around many of the things we cannot resolve. You cannot have this many things shoved into sources and methods so that the public can never figure out what's going on.
And classified and put into a garage.
Sources and methods. And we have this, you know, we have an incredible structure for avoiding the Freedom of Information Act, where we have private companies, and the private companies are entrusted with secrets that you can't afford to hold in government. So in the same way that, you know, a rich person will set up an irrevocable trust and say, what, assets? I don't have the assets.
Penetrate this.
Right. You know, and the answer is the person doesn't have the assets. A container has the assets, and that somebody is in control of the container, directing the container to make loans, which are, you know, taxed under different structures. Mm-hmm. And so the person is
and limited liability for them,
living an incredible lavish lifestyle with no assets. And so my feeling is that the government has figured out the FOIA issue, which is like, what information? We don't have any information.
But it seems to me, if there were hyper intelligent aliens or some huge, kind of malevolent entity on Earth, that they couldn't find a better way to destroy Earth than sort of undermining our faith in science. And I feel like we're doing that ourselves.
No. Okay. The cowards in science are doing that. And in particular, you know, a short time ago, I was against public health. And people thought, like, how can you be against
what is that? Explain what you mean public health. Not just funding for, single pay.
We have a culture of non-scientific behavior that involves manipulating massive numbers of people. Because both war and pandemic are two places where you cannot make a libertarian argument. You can't say, well, whoever wants to go can go. Good luck with that. Then that's going to be a self-extinguishing argument. So there is a sort of sacred obligation when invoking public health, saying you all have to do the following thing.
Right.
And safety, unfortunately, this appeals to people who are willing to forego income for the privilege of telling other people how to live their lives. So it selects for the wrong element. Ideally, what you would want is people who are loath to tell other people how to live their lives, who only invoke this when it is absolutely necessary. But good luck convincing people who are 2 clicks away from pure libertarianism to go into this public health field. So we absolutely need public health, but we can't afford Fauci-style, Collins-style public health. And, you know, what that is, and Daszak's, you know, and it's the manipulation of people invoking science to tell people to do things that you claim are in the best interest, the social welfare function of your nation. It has destroyed our credibility because people do not distinguish between science and public health, like medicine and public health.
Physicians. And,
Okay, so it's time to recognize that we need a divorce. We've been separated for a long time, and we forgot to cancel the credit card. And public health has been running around charging everything to the Amex that belongs to science. And now we have this huge bill. It's like, well, what about science? What about all those Nobel Prize winners? It's like, you know what? You're absolutely right. Public health needs to pay for itself out of its own budget, its own credibility budget, and needs to leave science alone. And we need to cut Tony Fauci and Francis Collins loose.
And, you know, Jay obviously had, you know, utmost respect for the scientific accomplishments of Collins, and he even said he studied from a textbook written by Fauci back in the 80s when he was a med student.
Wait a second. Jay says, if I understand him correctly, I worked for 35 years in the belly of the beast, having no idea how a university actually operates. That's a much more important statement in my estimation. The key point is, first of all, he's not only a physician, he's also an economist.
Right. MD, PhD, and right.
And
at Stanford for both.
Right. He lived his entire life in Stanford not realizing that there's a secret book that you pull out in a panic room where the bookcase swings open. It's like, here's how the actual stuff goes down. And this is what I discovered at Harvard. And it's shocking because you don't realize the way power and science interact in these institutions.
Hasn't it gotten worse? I mean, I'm just going to quote some statistics that I like. Stanford, speaking of Stanford, only institution I was ever fired from. Not that I'm bitter about that. Stanford recently enrolled 16,937 undergraduate and graduate students and concurrently list 15,750 administrative staff, nearly 1-to-1. In the past, such costly Praetorian bloat, I forget where I got this, maybe Heather McDonald, I have to look up the source for this, would have sparked a faculty rebellion.
Shout out to Heather McDonald.
But not now. Six-figure salary, diversity, equity, inclusion, commissary. That's why I'm thinking it's Heather, because she wrote this wonderful book, The Diversity Delusion, which has a whole page dedicated to UCSD, by the way. Consequently, problematic standardized tests are damned as biased and antithetical to diversity.
Yeah, we have to destroy this structure.
What replaces it? So you overthrow Putin, and then who do you put in there?
Why make something that works worse?
Why make it that you're stipulating it's not working though? You're saying academia is not working.
The research university?
Yeah. Or, I mean, there's just a university. Like we don't have a university, and then there's university part 2, where you really
no. We have something called the AAU, the Association of American Universities, and we had something that used to be called NASLUG. I forget what it's been renamed to, which is the National Association of Land Grant Colleges. Okay, and these were the prestige research powerhouses, as distinguished from the also-rans. The degradation in this class of university is so profound due to deciding that we are going to empower administration over the professorate to run these things. Every university that you want to be associated with, the prestige comes from the professors having both a culture and being in charge. I was speaking to a colleague of ours who will remain nameless, and this person said to me, not knowing that I had studied this issue, with the National Bureau for Economic Research and the Harvard Economics Department and the Sloan Labor and Immigration Programs. Eric, you have to understand what a provost is. The provost is my boss. And I said, stop right there. I said, the provost is not your boss. You don't have a boss. You are your boss. If a provost is your boss, you have to not be at that university. You don't have a boss. The whole thing goes out the window. And then I started hearing about a secondary dean who is under the president, not under the control of the provost, who's sort of the academic administrator. And this is a dean for diversity, equity, and inclusion. Now, I love diversity. As you know, you can tell from my personal life, and friends, family, it's pretty much the United Nations.
That's
well,
right.
no, I'm just saying.
Yeah.
I love languages, I love food, I love travel, so that's an easy one. It's not the inclusion. People who deserve to be in the room, we need to beat down those doors and make sure that there's no extraneous reason that somebody can't get into the room that they deserve to be in via merit. Equity? Are you kidding me? Equity is just this horrible thing. I mean, it's a Trojan horse because it sounds like equality. It sounds like fairness. It sounds like
be against it.
Right. And the key point is equity needs to die.
I'm looking for my Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Award, which is around here somewhere.
Congratulations.
Yes.
But all the professors who are any good, call me up and tell me, I can't stand it. Should I retire? Should I leave? Should I stop my research?
It is a crisis. I mean, there is a crisis in the academic, kind of just the milieu that we do have this. First of all, yes, that the most powerful administrators used to be provost deans, academic affairs. Now it has moved to a diversity, equity, inclusion
Anybody
office,
focused on
Title
equity.
IX.
No, we should just ask a question. Do you believe in equity inside of an academic context?
It's considered the third leg of the three-legged stool by the president.
Please don't do the devil's advocate. This is an
I'm
incredibly
explaining
dangerous
to you how pervasive it is.
Look, this gives communism a bad name. What is the motto of communism? If you had to sum up communism in one aphorism.
From each according to his means, to each according to his needs.
From each according to his abilities, right? To each according to his or her needs. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. This is not even communism. This is saying the more able person may need to be struck down so that the less able person can perform so that we achieve this outcome. And I'm sorry, Marxism is bad enough. And I'm not talking about a social safety net. I'm not talking about.
We needed it here at this university.
I'm not talking about even socialism. I'm talking about this is, Dr. Seuss, Theodore Geisel, who has a library named after him, wrote an obscure book called On Beyond Zebra, which I believe is now banned. I'm not sure.
If you have a copy, it's worth
I
quite
do.
a
I know. This is on beyond communism. So it's like, this is communism for people who didn't think the amount of suffering under communism was sufficient. True equity has never been tried even vaguely. The Soviet Union would have been freaked out to try equity. The old saying as to why Stalin maintained freedom for his theoretical physicists was, well, he was crazy, but he wasn't stupid.
Right.
This is just dumb, and we need to get rid of the E in DIE.
And certainly I think there's an underground, spoken about in hushed whispers, because of the fact that we recognize that in the past it was more than necessary, and it may have overcorrected. At this very university, you and I have talked about this before, we had both Jonas Salk, the Salk Institute. It's forbidden to own land here. My house title, it says I can't sell it to a Jew, Hispanic, or a Mexican, or a Native American. So that's kind of funny that a Jew owns this house.
Wait, you're Jewish?
Too Jewish. And Maria Geppert Mayer could only come here and have our physics department named after her because she was kicked out of Chicago. She couldn't get a permanent position in Argonne. So certainly it was necessary, and I think
what was necessary? Equity was never necessary.
Not equity, but to have I would just say affirmative action at that point to let in people who were meritocratic. They deserved to be here. I don't think you could argue Jonas Salk and Maria Geppert Mayer didn't earn a position in academia.
I don't know what conversation we're having. I just said that we need inclusion of people who have the merit to be in. We have to be vigilant, and we have to realize that those people are going to come in every flavor. Right. All 31 flavors according to Baskin Robbins. Fine.
The question,
equity?
Yeah.
No,
never,
equity never has over been, my dead body.
Mm-hmm. So,
and by the way, exclusion needs to be practiced. People who believe in equity need to be excluded from a meritocratic context, because you can't afford. I think we saw this in Algeria, where you have an election and the electorate decides to get rid of democracy?
Well, yeah, Hitler was voted democratically.
I know. So you have to have safeguards that say, look, we have a long-term commitment, and the threshold for undoing merit has to be extraordinary. And it's nowhere close to being met. In fact, my slogan is end bigotry in online anonymous chess.
Well, now they've done that with anonymous auditions for most classical orchestras. I want to pivot to a less controversial subject.
Wait, that's not a controversial subject. I'm sorry.
No, I'm joking because I'm going to go somewhere more controversial.
But it's not controversial. I want to say to you that I don't believe that this is a controversy. I believe what happened is that we lost control of a layer that became possessed of cult-like beliefs. And so when you're talking about like the Heaven's Gate cult, I'm sure that I believe many things that the Heaven's Gate people would find controversial, but they're not here right now, right?
Right.
Because this is a self-extinguishing behavior. We're not going to do a self-extinguishing behavior. We have got to figure out how to get rid of all of this infrastructure that we coked ourselves up on over the last 5 years.
But maybe it's not possible within the current structure. Are you familiar with something called the IKEA effect?
The IKEA effect?
The IKEA effect. Maybe
Are you saying that the people feel differently as to whether they've built something and have put sweat equity into something as to whether it's handed to them?
They ascribe more value to something that they've created, right? So this is something they've created, right? So that you are familiar with it. So they've created this structure and these strictures, and it's not. I want to pivot away from this, but to this, and I want to say the following: the university system has now ingested this these divisions of diversity, equity, inclusion, vice chancellor. There's an apparatus, there's a structure, it's detailed. We're not the first people to talk about it. We already referred to Heather McDonald. You can go there to see it. What about if the secret and all these things are coming downstream from academia? In other words, the political class, the infighting, the lack of fear over Ukraine.
To get rid of the BA.
Right. Okay. So I want to pivot to that brings up my next topic. Maybe we need a different model for academia. Maybe we need the nonprofit or the kind of scholastic for its own sake approach is no longer relevant in the 21st century. After all, it's 1,000 years old.
I don't want to do this.
So what you don't think that there's an opportunity to replace the current
For 5 years,
academic?
we went crazy. Okay, so we have this like Red Guard. The Red Guard took over. I'm not going to pretend.
Even forget about that then. To just say, is academia in need of an overhaul? I mean, we've detailed already.
I don't think you're understanding where I am. We can't build a container that can hold money and funds that isn't susceptible to this. So right now, this is a container of water. Okay, imagine that the sides of this container were coated with poison. And every time that you had water that you wanted to put in, you're thinking about the water, but you're not thinking about the container, which poisons everything. So what you are allowed to do and not allowed to do. I mean, I understand if you want to get rid of legacy preferences, if you want to get rid of sports preferences, if you want to
tax the university endowments. I mean, there's
there's millions of things. But we cannot have a world where the only containers that you can build all inherit the same problem. Why did everything go crazy? If you've ever seen an ant mill, you have a bunch of ants that are leaving some sort of a scent trail, and they go around in a circle because all they're doing is following the trail, and the trail has happened, has
a chain.
Has a chain,
right.
Yeah.
There's no perturbations.
Right, and so in that circumstance, you've created an ant mill where every container produces the same effect. So what am I supposed to do? I'm supposed to come up with we
haven't tried communism.
Harvard is supposed to open a campus in Riyadh because it doesn't have the same laws. This is ridiculous. This is our country. We're being idiotic. Nobody is clamoring for higher Jewish participation in the NBA. What we need to do is we need to make sure that we are fair. And we need to help people who, I no longer am going to say underrepresented groups, because in fact, that questions, well, who's overrepresented? And the answer is, I'm sorry, if
Sophie's Choice,
if Japanese Americans, are absolutely the best at algebraic topology or algebraic geometry,
so be it.
So be it. And, if the question is, well, what about certain groups that have been historically disadvantaged? It's like, how do we get them some advantages early in their career so that we're not messing around with merit at the ends of their career? So we need to end equity, period, the end.
Given that, I think that, in the motor homunculus of society and culture, that the academia really is the root cortex of almost everything in society, right? I mean, look at Twitter. Well, look at Twitter. Okay, so Twitter. They were journalists, and they were the apex predators on on Twitter. They had the most prestige. They had these little blue check marks, etc. They all went to journalism school.
Okay.
No, I'm saying they all went to.
This is a story about Twitter that I don't accept. But you want to predicate an argument.
Okay,
so go ahead.
So professors all went to college, right? So look at how much in our culture and these ideas and.
I have a blue check mark, and it's not some big deal.
You may or may not be very. You may or may not be important. Notable. Yes, yeah. That's right. I think you're notable. But the question I have is really, well, if academia plays such a huge role, and to say that it hasn't changed. I mean, you have this famous quote, if you were teleported back to the 1950s or from the 1950s into a living room today, the biggest thing that you would notice are...
I say 73.
You'd notice flatter. The TVs are a little bit flatter, and you can't find the Victrola.
Subtract the screens, and more or less, it's only stylistic differences.
Okay, so I'll do you 10 centuries more. Go back to the year 1080 in the University of Bologna in Italy, and there was a guy, and he was scraping on a piece of rock with another piece of rock, and there were a bunch of young people sitting in front of him. Now, that hasn't changed, right? So if you teleport him here, they'd say, wow, the walls sure are flat. This is a similar kind of thing. We're not in a cave anymore. So why not say that actually the whole thing needs to be rethought, remade, in a way to serve the needs of the third millennium since this was invoked.
Right, these things are elitist institutions.
Of course, yeah.
No, you say of course. They're supposed to be elite institutions.
But you and I buy into it.
Okay.
We're both Ivy League educated, right? We both put some freemium on such things, right?
Again, it has nothing to do with the Ivy League. It doesn't have to do... This is a priesthood of a certain kind.
It's a guild, yes. Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's elite the same way Navy SEALs are elite. It's the same way the head of your surgical team is elite. I never heard anyone say, I'm not going to allow my child to have life-saving surgery until we get somebody who's not elitist. It's like, give me the best effing surgeon you can possibly find. Okay? So what we can't have is we can't have our current elite ruining the concept of elite. The elite looting party, the elite termites that are eating through the infrastructure. Every time I hear the word, my simplest phrase is, our elite are not. Period. That is what's true. We need to reestablish the concept of elitism. And it needs to be more like, we brought up in the last, I'm very affected by Jeff Beck's passing for some reason. Jeff Beck was the most elite of electric guitarists. We're not going to Harrison Bergeron Jeff Beck into mediocrity to serve some goal. We need an elite system, and we have to be open about it, and we have to stop lying about... You're not necessarily underrepresented. You're only underrepresented if you want it so badly you're willing to put in 100-hour weeks. You want it so badly that you're willing to do whatever it takes to teach yourself this, and then you're having a problem because of the color of your skin. All of us are going to stand shoulder to shoulder to defend the people who deserve to be here, because we need to broaden the concept of who can be elite. Now, with that said, I'm angry at you guys. You have these positions. Supposedly you have tenure, and you let this get away from you. Why is it that I'm talking about this from outside?
Oh, someone would say you have less to lose. You're not going to get your tenure revoked.
Excuse me.
You're not going to get...
I have the
your
same...
medical
I have fancy degrees and fancy postdocs just like the rest of you. And quite honestly, I don't think you guys understood the threat as early as I did.
That certainly could be true. I think that
but you're scared,
and because
you're scared to say. For
it's
example,
hard to make a man believe
China
something.
has abused our graduate student labor program because everybody knows that
I don't think it's China. I think America admitted a labor force. Go ahead.
Okay, you're afraid to say real things. And the truth
I'm
is,
not afraid to say
well,
anything.
yes, you are.
Well,
Sorry,
Okay.
I'm afraid to say many things, right?
okay. I'm not afraid in the context of
Okay,
entity.
so I'm saying nobody I was at MIT in a room filled with Chinese postdocs. And when I spoke out about the abuse of this for espionage and for information gathering, which is that our labor force is our students, and we don't like to admit to it, and the professors talk about slave labor and joke about
working conditions.
using words like coolies. Let's be
Really?
honest. Oh, science coolies, yeah.
I've never heard that.
I have it on tape. Slave labor on tape, laughing.
It's reprehensible.
It's reprehensible. But my point is that these labs staff themselves with a cryptic labor program, and certainly not all Chinese students are spies.
No.
But China is doing exactly what any smart country would do, and it is availing itself of the fact that they are sending enormous numbers of people into a very specialized work pipeline. And we are getting rid of the advantage that comes from our freedom because they can't do what we can do,
Right, it's
because they have a
asymmetrical.
hierarchical system. Now, most of us are scared to say this because it's a one-line argument. Oh, sounds like you're having a problem with people who look different from you. It's like, oh, well, I guess that's the argument.
Well, just in the same case, there were quotas back when Feynman and others were Jewish, trying to get into
So we
graduate
have
schools.
tons of people of Chinese origin and extraction.
We do.
And we have Jews, we have Indians. We have so much going for. I want those people, regardless of the color of their skin or their religious belief structure,
Or where they come from, right?
right,
Mhm.
to make use of our freedom-drenched system, because I believe what it does is it produces high-variance individuals. And what we're addicted to is low-variance labor. The rest of the world is much better at low variance, and we create pains in the ass.
Well, I think this is a symptom of what's colloquially called a resource curse, like we have in Saudi Arabia, where there's tremendous amounts of oil, and that's allowed them to effectively bypass and shortcut any need to develop advanced physics or technology, rocket
The
programs.
smart ones are figuring out
They
how
are
to wean
figuring out,
themselves away from oil.
From oil, right.
And my point is, the cost saving that you imagine from moving your supply chains to your competitors, this whole thing is based on a crazy idea that if we just make ourselves so interdependent, no one will ever declare war.
Right. Well, that goes back to Nixon and opening up China. In 1940.
Sure, but how is that working in Ukraine? Right?
Absolutely.
The old claim is that no country with a McDonald's has ever attacked another
Right.
country with a McDonald's.
Now they don't
How's
have
that working out?
They don't have a McDonald's anymore. They have
And
Moscow
again,
Mule.
the other part of it is that we've got to not focus our anger on China. China's doing the right thing by China.
Right.
We have to not focus our anger on our Chinese students. They're doing exactly what I do. Most of them are not engaged in this. Most of them are just trying to immigrate.
Right.
Right. What we have to do is to focus on the portion of the National Academy of Science, the National Science Foundation, that stabbed American labor in the back starting in 1986.
Is it more important to rectify past injustices, or
God, I can't keep doing this. We screwed up and we made permanent changes. We have to undo permanent changes. Stop making it into something about vindictive. It has nothing to do with
I'm not saying it's vindictive. I don't think it's as relevant as you think it is now, although I am in full agreement it was relevant in the 80s and 90s when you were...
Everybody look up graphs over time of the number of foreign Ph.D. students disaggregated by country of origin. And you tell me whether we have a problem.
And see what the slope is now. See if the slope is still
It's
as
not
high
the
as it
slope.
was.
It's also the question of the state. It's not just the flow. The state.
I mean, just anecdotes are not plural of data, as they say, but I've noticed far fewer. I've had phenomenal Chinese individuals
everybody has.
that are now professors in China. They're not professors here.
Well, some of them are professors here.
Some of them are. I'm just saying, anecdotally, from my personal laboratory
And
experience.
we need a certain. We
And we
deserve to
exchange-
have. We should go
Right,
after.
if they're the best in the world, right.
If there are, but very often we've used the best and the brightest argument for hands.
I know,
doing
but
to work
I never
rather than
paid my
mine.
Chinese graduate student less than I paid my American graduate
No, but
student.
you paid your Chinese and your American graduate students far less by pushing out the supply curve. If supply equals demand at a particular point,
I understand.
okay, so then but then why make that argument?
Well, because I think, again, these are...
We're going to get into like general equilibrium versus partial equilibrium.
I'm worried
is the
about fighting the
This
past
is the
war
refuge
is
of
what I'm worried
scoundrels.
about.
We have a problem. The issue studied by the National Science Foundation in 1986, and you can find this on the web, is that they schemed to destroy the bargaining ability of American STEM workers. And what they did is that they studied supply and demand. They figured out how can we get the wage down. And then what they did is to say, okay, if we release that, it's going to look terrible. So what we're going to do is we're going to subtract off the demand curves. And we're only going to leave the supply curves. And we're going to train a competent economic analysis. And we're going to turn it into an incompetent demographic analysis. We're going to stir people up that we're not going to have anybody to take over STEM. We'll pass the Immigration Act of 1990. And then when you morons figure out what we actually did on behalf of scientific employers, it'll all be too late. And my claim is, I don't understand. Why can't we revisit this, Brian? Why are you going to dissipate the righteous anger whose purpose is not vindictive? The purpose is to say, we need American scientific employers crying for mercy at the bargaining table. We need to have new PhDs being offered $250,000 in STEM.
Look, we just had a strike in the whole University of California, including my students, on strike demanding higher above average wages and so forth. Their wages of physics graduate students were already 1 to 2 sigma above what a biology graduate student would earn or a chemistry graduate student would earn, because we are forced by market forces to effectively pay.
No, you're not.
By physics. This is maybe unique to astrophysics and cosmology. I don't think it is, because when I look for a postdoc, I have to advertise at the rate of a Hubble Fellow, which is not an insubstantial amount of money.
What this is a terrible argument, right? The argument is, well, people are getting $80,000 a year or something. I don't know what the current rates.
It could be for postdocs. It's over.
But my point is, if Wall Street is paying way over that and the skill set is fungible, I would like to see physicists getting 85% of a Wall Street salary with a 15% premium.
Good luck. I mean, me too.
Sorry.
Look.
Good luck. No,
Eric, if my kid here at UC San Diego, if she gets into UC San Diego or gets into Princeton or gets into Harvard, she will pay full freight. If I were a Princeton professor or a Caltech professor, if my child gets into UC San Diego, Harvard, or University of Florida, I will pay nothing for my kids. In other words, there's more than just compensation. There are market. Now, I chose this because it was it had a lot of advantages over other institutions, private institutions that I had a faculty offer at for a variety of reasons. But the playing field is not equal, even at the professorial level.
The current system because it has been adulterated. It was adulterated under the Mansfield Amendment. It was under in the Eilberg Amendment in 1976, the Bayh-Dole Amendment in 1980. The shortage studies of 1986 through 90, the Immigration Act of 1990. We are up against a series of changes that have killed our university system, which are deliberately self-inflicted changes.
So why not tear that down and construct a new structure?
Tear that down because I'm the only one talking about this, Brian. And so when you take the only person talking about this.
Well, there are it's the University of Austin, Texas. It's a new model. I'm not saying
Brian,
pro or con.
Nobody else is willing to be a xenophilic restrictionist, because saying you're a restrictionist is a one-line argument. Oh, sounds like you don't like people who look different from you.
Asian-hating, Asian.
Exactly. So, Brian, my question is, why are you playing devil's advocate when you understand exactly what I mean?
I'm not playing devil's advocate. I'm saying exactly in concert with what you're saying. And the best way is not to try to, keep injecting morphine into the patient, hoping they're going to start kicking alive.
Be more courageous. It is very clearly detailed. You want to look at the Mansfield Amendment, the Eilberg Amendment, Bayh-Dole, the shortage studies, bad demography, secret good economics, and the Immigration Act of 1990, among other things. And you need to repeal these things if you want the magic back. And we also have to look at getting rid of diversity, equity, and inclusion in its simplistic form so that we can get the diversity and inclusion that we actually need by getting rid of the equity and making sure that we can also exclude people who don't deserve to be in the room. Thanks.
Today you tweeted out you'd like to get updates on the 3rd, 4th, 5th objects shot down over Alaska, Yukon, Lake Huron. These are balloons or some unidentified objects. You asked about the origin of COVID. Are we going to get new information on EcoHealth, new NYC interference?
Right.
The origin of the source of the Epstein trading fortune, paper mask mandate efficacy, money supply changes on CPI, vaccine assessment. You get one of those.
No.
I want to ask.
I'm an American. I want information.
You want all of them.
I don't want to play inside of these nonsense frameworks.
I'm just trying to diagnose. What is key? What one thing? I mean, you're one man. You're just a man.
No.
You're just a man.
No, I have a very large following, and people follow me because I'm willing not to be a pussy about it. We deserve all of these things. This is normal behavior. We expect to know because we have to make a decision every 4 years who's the president. We have to make a decision about senators on a more frequent basis. And the answer is we cannot do our jobs as an informed electorate having our news media owned by billionaires who are absolutely filled with the letter of journalism and empty of its spirit.
What about Twitter, where you have a large following? We will link to your Twitter profile.
Yes,
here.
because what we know from the Twitter files is that there are government agencies that are pushing to slow the spread of what they call malinformation. Malinformation is just information that is dangerous to a narrative. So you have statecraft, where you have to do things and then explain what you're doing. We misexplain what we're doing almost every day. We starve people for information. Smart people say, I don't get it. I don't understand. And then we say, okay, we need to pre-bunk agents of malinformation. In other words, we need to destroy the reputation of non-state actors, individuals, citizens, who are going to spread malinformation, which is information. This is dystopia. And what I'm trying to say is we don't need devil's advocacy. What we need is... Do you not agree with me on this stuff, Brian?
Angels, God's advocates. I of course I agree with you on this.
So we agree.
I think that, but I want to give myself a little bit of
an out.
Not an out. No, I'm saying I am on the ground. I am actively in the academy,
right? And
I am seeing things. I also think the studies that you mentioned, by the way, 1986 and 1990. I'm no mathematician, but those aren't 2023. I think some things with regard to low importation of lower of massive amounts of foreign individuals who may be better at physics than say an American student, whatever that means. That is not as prevalent as it was when those studies were written. Okay, I'm telling you, from encountering both as a professor, I don't get a mandate. I don't have market forces. I can't pay one student from China less than a student from, as you say, the whole thing has to go, right? Okay, so that, but I do want to say that there.
Brian, I'm not going to let you. There's no out. If you understand supply curves, if you understand partial equilibrium, general equilibrium, if you understand all of this stuff, this was a targeted program to destroy us. Our leaders, the National Science Foundation, tried.
For what purpose?
Lower wages.
Why?
Eric Bloch was
that would just benefit the professors that you're trying to subvert. I don't get. Two things cannot be simultaneously true. They can't be doing it for the benefit, financial or otherwise, of the academicians.
You have a class of people who are in a chair. Those class of people, there was not going to be a new allocation of money. They were about to see their entire pyramid structure collapse.
Which structure are we talking about?
All right.
Let's just stay with physics. I'm a simple man. Let's just stay with physics.
No, we're going to do mathematics for a reason.
Okay, fine.
Mathematics has the Math Genealogy Project. I want everybody to go and look up Norman Steenrod at the University of North Dakota in the Math Genealogy Project.
I'll put it on the
screen. You'll see something like 23 students, and they all but one at the very end in 1972 survived to adulthood and reproduce. So if you imagine that Norman Steenrod could create a Norman Steenrod, he would create 23 Norman Steenrods. And then you'd have 23 to higher and higher powers, and that system is going to explode. That's what was about to happen in the early 1970s. This is Derek DeSola Price. And the workaround is to preserve the culture and the style to which certain professors had become accustomed without fixing and addressing the system. Okay, so whoever was already in needed a steady supply of students who would not survive to adulthood. And this became the Hunger Games around 1973, 1971, something in there. Okay. That structure is lumbering forward into today, which it makes no sense. What we figured out is that we could sell visas, which have high value but are not fungible. How valuable is a visa to an American citizen? Not at all. What's more, that pushes out the supply curve. So what you did is you sold immigration, in order for one cohort to live in this preposterous Dionysian style, which is not supportable. And what needed to happen is that there needed to be a reckoning. We probably needed to go to a eusocial education model where you have a queen in a colony who reproduces, and most of the people work. They don't, most of the bees or the ants in Hymenoptera work. So what we needed is most of us not to be fertile. And we avoided that. And we avoided the need for more money. And we avoided the need to pay market salaries because we were going from a period where we were educating sub 10% of the population at post-secondary level to approximately 50%, which was a one-time thing. And by the way, I'm just bored of this because I've been at this since the early 1990s, late 80s. And academicians do not understand their own economics. How many graduate students have you had?
That have graduated?
Yeah, Ph.D. students.
15.
Okay. So I want you to think of yourself as a Mormon. You've had 15 graduate students. Your colleagues maybe want 15 graduate students. Where are these people going to go?
This is 15 over 19 years, Eric. This isn't 15 at once.
You don't even have that many children, Brian.
Close. I'm working on it.
I know.
Hi, honey.
But
it's Valentine's Day.
Right, but what I'm trying to get at is, at what point I'm trying to explain an exponential to people who do exponentials for a living.
Right. There's a replacement value that everyone has
this is straight up Upton Sinclair trying to explain to people your idea of, it's 15 over 19 years. Madness.
I think we're going to have to agree to agree.
Okay.
Last question before we go out for our Valentine's Day repast. Celebratory.
Celebrating our wives.
Since the last time we met, Elon has taken over Twitter.
Yeah.
Has that made you more optimistic, less optimistic that any of these
it's an interesting question.
Very valid points are going to be answered?
There's a huge spike right now in antisemitism on Twitter. And what you realize is that when people start talking in terms of, there's so many different communities, we have to understand different community norms. Many of us got inured to the issue of bigotry because of the abuse, the crying wolf that the woke engaged in for 5 years or 10 years, or I don't know where we are.
Right.
Those are communities. There is a Stormfront community, right?
4chan community.
4chan communities. And these communities are super dangerous. And we have a choice as to how we want to constrain them. We can either do it at the level of rules, or we can do it at the level of culture. Now, I'm emphatic about which I want. I want the anti-Semites to have the right to speak. And I want the anti-black bigots and the misogynists to have the right to speak. And I want to make that right not a right that we see used almost at all. And in order to do that, you have to have an extremely strong culture of free speech, and that recognizes that free speech is not the right of a society to commit suicide by engaging in its absolutely worst behaviors. The problem that I see is that many people find this entertaining. Oh, did you see that thing that happened? Oh my God, he said this and she said that. And you're thinking, do you realize how dangerous this is? That your enjoyment, your entertainment. So Elon has a particular belief structure that I really dislike, which is that the most entertaining thing is what the world will do.
Pay attention to.
And my feeling about this is, you want to know what's entertaining? Conspiracy theories about ethnic groups.
That'll get a lot of clicks and likes.
Absolutely. People find it interesting. They want to discuss it. And my issue is, I don't want to go back on the First Amendment. I want to extend the First Amendment not only through our society, I wanted to extend it worldwide. But people don't recognize that that goes hand in glove with having a strong enough culture to resist these things. And we're not interested.
To not use them.
So I don't know what to do in a world in which we're going to decide that it's super entertaining. A guy who's been very nice to me personally is this guy, Michael Malice. I don't know what his real name is. But Jay Leno, I think, got scalded because a car blew up on him and his face was, burns on his face.
Yeah.
And he tweeted out, wow, Leno hasn't been hot like this in years. And I thought, wow. I didn't have I'm not necessarily a big Jay Leno fan, but that's a soul.
It's a cruelty, right?
That's yeah. And the idea is that this has become normal for us. So, yay, Elon getting rid of the spaghetti code, which says
not yay, Elon, but yay, Elon.
Well, we can talk about yay too, but we are in a problem we don't have a solution to. And I used to talk about this with Jack Dorsey, and I said I don't think that Twitter has a solution. It is not the case that the most entertaining thing happening is a good idea. It's a terrible idea. You want to know what's entertaining? Cruelty. People love it.
Oh yeah.
And one of the things that people love about cruelty
films
is that they love finding a thin socially positive excuse for their cruelty. I'm not actually being cruel.
Right, I'm watching. Right.
I'm stopping a badness that you don't recognize.
You can go on Twitter right now. My child can look at a murder. Could see during George Floyd.
But I'm saying something else.
But it's also awful for
somebody is saying
access to that.
I'm going to publish this person's address because they are a menace to society, and the person is not a menace to society. So they come up with a threadbare excuse because what they want to engage in is cruelty.
To backfill the narrative that allows them to be cruel.
Yeah, and I think that what we have to recognize is we seem to enjoy cruelty and destruction as entertainment because the phone is desensitizing us. And a lot of it came out of the multiplayer gaming community where people know that first-person shooters are not real. And so it's like, I just splattered your brains all over that wall. Pink mist, anybody?
Frag.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But then if you looked at the Christchurch killings, it looks exactly like a first-person shooter being live streamed. And my claim is that we've blurred these distinctions. So I think that the previous Twitter was an abomination, and I don't know how Elon is going to try to solve this. But if I had one plea, it would be Elon, Trump, and Kanye have all figured out that drunken boxing, intellectual drunken boxing, is a good strategy for a while. Because nobody knows what you're going to do. It's super entertaining. But then it goes off the rails. Mm-hmm. And, my feeling is that Elon is the smartest of them. And I hope that he'll have a change of heart and reconsideration, because I actually believe that somewhere in him he wants the best for the planet. But I'm just going to tell you right now is you can listen to an entire conversation about communities and bringing people together,
trust and safety,
and you don't realize that the KKK is a community. Mm-hmm. And there's not much of it, but that you do not want to let a few cells replicate at an incredible rate and then figure it out later.
Well, we always end on a happy note here, Eric.
Can we?
I want to wish you...
Wait. No, let's talk about something great.
Something in science that excites you. What excites you?
I'm really hoping, for example, that artificial intelligence tells us something about the wiring diagram for the mind of the C. elegans nematode. We have a complete adjacency matrix. We have optogenetics, and we have green fluorescent protein that we can attach so we can actually watch the worm think.
Developed here. Right?
Yeah, there's about 300 or so neurons. I would love it if the same techniques that were put into protein folding or Go or chess were put onto the worm, and we found that the machines could figure out how thought actually occurs in a relatively, the simplest of systems,
complex system,
simplest system that has locomotion, reproduction, and ingestion of food and digestion. I think that is a great example of something that I think will succumb before we actually have artificial general intelligence. Mm-hmm. And I really hope that, and this is like perverse, I hope we have a near miss with very little casualty or loss of life in Ukraine, and everyone sits bolt upright and said, oh my God, this is not safe to be on this planet. What do we do now? What we need is to galvanize a Manhattan Project to allow non-scientific people and scientific people alike to decide whether they want to stay here with Xi, Putin, Biden,
Trump,
Trump, Nasrallah, Khamenei.
Bibi.
Because I don't want to be anywhere near any of these people. I will take my chances in the cosmos. Not all of these experiments can work, but this thing is about to go critical, and I don't know whether it's going to be 50 years, 150 years, or 5 years, but I'm really hoping that what we see is a renaissance in terms of technically capable people shouldering the responsibility of recognizing that we're waiting for the bread to rise, and that this place is a womb, and it's time to be born. We started the Pitocin in 1952-53, and it's now time to go.
Fitting for February 14th, which is the date in which Carl Sagan commanded the Voyager 1 spacecraft, the farthest object made by mankind, sent back in the early 1970s to do a grand tour of the universe. And on that fateful day in 1990, on Valentine's Day, exactly 33 years ago, he commanded it to point at the Earth and called it the famous pale blue dot.
And do you remember the...
it was just when he was beyond the orbit of Uranus.
And do you remember the story about the golden record?
The story, Eric, I had on the subject of the golden record, who I'd love to have you host on the portal. God willing, you will inshallah initiate it again. Andrewian was a guest on the
years ago. I remember Saturday Night Live's Weekend Update saying that we sent this record with all of these different, Bantu hollers and calls and
world music,
the Box B minor Mass and Chuck Berry, and that we got a faint echo from the farthest reaches of space, which said, "Send more Chuck Berry."
On that happy note, thank you, my friend.
Thank you, sir.
Great to see you.
Great
to be in person. Stay tuned for more great episodes. If you'd like to see an episode where Eric outlines what he would do if he ran Weinstein University, go to the back catalog. We'll put a link in somewhere for you to find our most frequent and requested guest. Thank you so much for joining us on the Into the Impossible podcast.